Dear learners, once again welcome back to SWAYAM NPTEL course on library automation and networking. This is week 2nd, module 2nd, automation of housekeeping operations and library services. This particular title will be handling areas of library automation, that will be acquisition and technical division. Dear learners, as we have seen libraries and the housekeeping operations, how do we perform the housekeeping operations in a particular library, and what are the planning and the implementation procedures which we have already discussed in the last week. So in this particular session we will be discussing more about how this particular housekeeping operations can be automated. That means how it can be computerized, what are the applications of computers in these particular areas. So in this particular session we will be concentrating on two major areas of housekeeping operations, that is acquisition division and technical division. So before going to this particular division, as a whole we know that when we talk about housekeeping operations or housekeeping activities or regular activities in a particular library, so we majorly classified them into different areas or different divisions or different sessions. So each division we will be calling them as different major divisions like acquisition division, technical processing division, circulation division, then we will be having serial control or periodical divisions, or the divisions meant for maintenance, or the divisions meant for giving additional services like reference services, photocopy services, binding services, digital library services, or these are all part of housekeeping operations including reports and statistics. So when we talk about library housekeeping operations, as we know that these sections or these divisions, there are many subunits or small units which are working under every major units or major divisions or sections. So there are a lot of activities are happening, even if you take a small library or bigger library, there are a lot of activities are happening in each and every sessions. So sometimes we may not call it as technical processing division. Instead, when you take a small library like school libraries, we may not be having two divisions, only one division will be performing the jobs of two divisions. So in that cases we normally call them as acquisition division. That means we will not be having a separate division exclusively for acquisition and exclusively for the technical division. So in such scenarios we call them as a single division as acquisition division, whereas they will be performing the jobs of both the divisions. But when you take a university library system as bigger library where the collection is big or the users are more, in such kind of activities where the workload is more, so we will be dividing such kind of activities into two divisions. One is specifically for acquisition, the other one is specifically for the technical processing. So before going for this automation procedures, we will be getting some kind of an idea that how in a manual system or a traditional system, how these particular works have been performed, or what are the works which are happening in the acquisition division as well as this particular technical division. As a scenario of complete library housekeeping operations, there are many activities which are happening, and one activity is in most of the time it is related to the other activities. That means it is something which is interconnected or linked between the sessions. That means the remaining job of a particular division will be carried out by the next division. So there should be a systematic order, there should be a hierarchy in every library that one work will be finished and then its continuation will be going to the next division. So this we call it as integrated, or which are interrelated or which are interlinked, whereas the jobs are continuation of the previous unit or previous session. In this particular session, so we will be handling more about acquisition and technical processing. As the title indicates, it is automation of housekeeping operations of a library. That means we will be going for the second part, housekeeping operations in an automated environment, whereas we will be clearly talking about, or we will make a clear understanding what are the jobs which are happening in a traditional system, so that you will be able to computerize that particular job. So let me introduce you about the acquisition division first. So when we talk about acquisition, it is something like we are acquiring something for the library. That means you are receiving something for the library, you are getting something for the library. That means something should be kept in the library which you are getting from outside. So that is the simplest meaning of acquisition. So this particular division is responsible for acquiring something for the library. It can be a book, or it can be an electronic resource, it can be anything else which is not part of print or non-print media like CDs, or any electronic medium can be part of that. So what you are going to acquire, there should be a procedure for that. So anything which is part of acquisition will be taken care by the acquisition division. So when you acquire something, that has to be processed and that should have some kind of a systematic procedures. So what is that systematic procedures? So when we talk about acquisition division, so we are getting something for the library. That means it has a procedure or it has a some kind of a hierarchy. So in that way, the works or the activities which are carried out in a particular acquisition division can be further divided into many divisions or many activities, such as selection, then ordering, and then the third procedure is we are receiving it, and the fourth one is accessioning, and the last one is maintaining of records. So these are the major 5 activities which are happening in an acquisition division in a traditional environment. So let me make you clear about all these particular activities which are happening in a particular library, because which requires some kind of a systematic procedures. So when we talk about acquisition, the first step is acquiring something. That means for acquiring something we need to have some kind of a request. So how do we get a request? As we know that as a librarian we don't have, or as an acquisition person we don't have any kind of a role, or we don't have any such kind of a privilege that you can buy something for the library as your own. Up to some extent bigger libraries have, but in a normal case, unless until somebody recommend, unless until somebody asks for something, you will not be able to procure them. So what we require is we need to get some kind of a request from someone. So normally the users or the patrons or the clients, they are responsible, or they are authorized to give some kind of a recommendation for you. So when in a traditional environment, what we do, we get recommendation from the users. So for recommendation, how do we get? If they say orally, we can't receive that, or we will not be able to make such kind of a procedure if they give without any documentary proof. So what we need is we need to have a recommendation form. So as a part of policy, you will be making a recommendation form or an order form, so that this particular user will be giving a particular request to you. So that will be verified by you as a person who is responsible for the acquisition division. So the first job of a particular person who is there, the charge of acquisition, will be checking the details of that particular recommendation form. So this particular form will be verified by the acquisition staff whether the details given by this particular person is complete, or he has followed all the procedures that has to be followed in a particular recommendation form, details of the book or whatever he asks. So everything will be detailed checked by this particular person. So once it is checked, the next stage is the duplication check. So that means whether this particular record is already available, this particular document is already available in the library, or previously we have procured it or not. If it is procured, how many copies further we require. So all this will be done in this particular scenario. So the particular staff will be checking the details which have been given by the person, whether it is duplicated in the library or not. Accordingly, he will make a comment on that, if it is available, if it is not available. So once it is done, the next step is to get the approval. That means he will check all the details and even including the availability of that particular resource in the market, and once he has compiled and pricing system, everything he has compiled, and then it will be submitted for the approval. That means before the committee, like there will be a committee like approval committee or selection committee, whoever it may be. So once you get the approval, that means approval can be 2 types. One can be administrative approval, the other can be financial approval. So once the approval for purchasing, go ahead for purchasing, so you need to have some kind of a budget or fund. So you need to check how much fund you have. So that is also the responsibility of acquisition division. So once it is done, that means you have enough money to buy this particular resource, so you need to take the financial approval. So once you get administrative approval as well as financial approval, then you will go for ordering this particular request. That means you have completed your selection procedures, you have recommended, received, and then you have checked it and you got the approval for financial as well as the administrative. So once it is completed, the next stage is to go for a vendor. So that means vendor is somebody who is supplying this particular document or the resources. You have been selected or you have been approved by the committee, particular committee. So once it is done, the next stage is, once all these procedures have been completed, the next stage is to select a particular vendor. So selecting a vendor, it can be previously you can select a group of vendors that we call it as M-panel list. So that means this particular list will be having a group of vendors, those who are able to supply for your orders. So you are making such kind of an M-panel list. From there you will be selecting some people or some vendors in which you are comfortable or you feel that these people can deliver that particular material. So once it is decided, that means vendors list also ready, you have chosen a vendor. Once it is ready, the next stage is to provide them the purchase order. So making a purchase order is to be taken very carefully, because all the terms and conditions, all the details of a particular book, everything should be maintained properly. So you should have some kind of a sequence also for the purchase order, like purchase order number. So when we do this in a traditional environment, we don't have any other mechanism, like we normally used to have a recommendation form. It can be either typed or it can be even written also. So you will be giving and maintaining this particular purchase order, and this will be posted to the particular person in which you have selected as a vendor. Once everything goes smooth, the supplier will send this particular consignment to you. Along with that, invoice will be there, your purchase order copy will be there, the consignment will be there, and next step is to receive that particular material. That means it may come in bundle or a single book. So based on that, your purchase order, he has issued all the books, that means he has supplied all the materials. Then you will be checking the physical condition, address, everything. If everything is correct, then you will be keeping this in the particular area where the acquisition is happening. So once you are clear that everything is, even bill, all the materials, everything you have received, then the next step is to accession it. That means you will be giving a unique number. Normally it is a sequential number. That number we call it as accession number, and we have a separate register for that we call it as acquisition register. So in that particular register you will be maintaining, and you will be entering the accession number. That means the number in which it has come recently. So that number will be given to that particular resource, and this particular bill will be processed for the financial division. So that is the normal procedures which are happening in the acquisition division. So in that way, collectively, acquisition division is responsible for acquiring something for the library. So that is why we call this particular section as acquisition division or acquisition section, or sometimes we call it as collection development section, because you are making the collection development in this particular division. And as we know that this is the first session which we are dealing with a particular activity of a library, as well as here all the details which are related to a particular document will be available. So this is one of the section which is much more responsible for getting a resources, and they should have proper documents, all the details should be available, and all the mechanisms should be transparent. So once this is done, almost all the process of acquisition division is completed. So we were discussing about the acquisition division or work or the activities which are a part of acquisition division in a manual library. That means traditional library where there is no computers are available. As I told you that the works which are happening in the acquisition division is labor intensive, repetitive, some kind of an administrative or clerical job. So this job can be easily done by a computer, because it is something like a mechanized one or computerized one, where you can make the utilization of a computer very much essential. So this is something like a mechanized work or repetitive work or labor intensive work, where you can apply a computer very much. So the efficiency of the computer can be highly utilized in the acquisition division, where the repetitive works can be very much done using a computer. As I told you that the first step of acquisition division is receiving the recommendation. So how do we receive the recommendation in a paper format? So when we apply automation, so this particular work can be done in an automation mode. That means you can make an online application so that the person who is recommending this particular book can be recommended through an online format. So if you have an online recommendation form, the user will fill it up and then he will be able to submit the online process. Or if you can make something like computerization in the form of OPAC, that means there are some softwares, they provide suggestions window. That means through OPAC, a particular user will be able to log into his credentials, then he will have an option for submitting his suggestions. That means he will click on that particular submitting suggestions, and then he will enter all the details, then it will be submitted to the librarian. So the administrative or the person who is responsible for this particular acquisition division will be able to see in his dashboard, this particular person has been asked for this particular book. So that it will be easy that the person no need to physically come to the library, so he has to submit this particular and then it has to be verified. So it is an easy method when you do for automation in a online recommendation format. And the next step, as we have discussed, that once you receive the recommendation form, your duty as an acquisition staff to check the duplication and the details. So this also can be done online because you already have the OPAC. If this particular resource already been procured by the library, with a second you can check the details. Otherwise, also using this particular online format, you can just copy paste the wording and then you can do the checking also. So these are also very much possible, and OPAC is another medium where you can check the duplication. And the next stage is, as we have discussed, that the procedures, there are some processes which cannot be automated, like taking the approval from the higher authorities, that has to be submitted physically, and you have to make a justification for, suppose you are making one book, more copies to buy, then you have to make a justification for that. These things cannot be computerized in such ways, so we need to go for traditional method. So the next area is to make the purchase order. As we have discussed, that purchase order manually when we make, a lot of activities are involved. But when you make a purchase order which is already available in the automation process in a software, so it is very much useful for you to make a purchase order in an online format. And when you take some softwares, we call purchase order as baskets. That means you are creating a basket. In that basket you have to put something. That means you have to keep some resources details. So all the details which are given through online or the purchase suggestion mode can be directly extracted to this purchase options or the purchase order window. So once you get all the details into purchase order, you can add terms and conditions on that particular purchase order form and then close the basket. That means you made the purchase order ready. So everything is systematically, so you don't need to worry about the orders and keeping all this and the formats, templates, etc. So it is already available with you. And while making purchase order also, when you made the computerization, all the empanel listed vendors list will be available. So you can just click on that drop down menu and select the vendor in which you wanted to give this particular order. So it is easy for you to make such kind of a purchase order. So once it is made, it can be sent through either email or it can be posted also. Even you can take the reports, you can take the printout of purchase order very easily. So within a second you can make the purchase order, as the data, everything is available already there in the system. So once the purchase order made, as I discussed, that we need to make some kind of a follow-up. That means whether this particular purchase order is due to come, or how many books have been issued, is there any missing issues or the missing particular resource in this particular order. All this can be need to be regularly followed up. So this also can be done through the system, as you have already all the details in the system. With a single click you can make a claim to the supplier that you have not supplied before the due date, or this particular supply is making a due on this particular so and so date. So all this can be made through automation procedures. So these are all very much useful in the automation environment. And there are other additional features, like suppose you made a purchase order and you send it, and later you wanted to change that, you can make an editing in the purchase order which is available in that, and you can make a fresh purchase order or a modified purchase order. And also checking, you have an OPAC, you can check with the details how many books are available, even the duplication also. And apart from that, as we know, that currency conversion. So when we look into purchase order, in the case of serial control or in the case of journals, we need to make advance payment. Otherwise also in the case of books, we need to mention how much amount will be approximately for this particular book. So normally, as we know, that we follow Indian rupee currency. So whenever we need to convert this kind of currency, even currency conversion also, instead of doing manually, when the system is automatized, you can easily convert those conversion date into foreign currency as Indian currency. And the next area is funding or budget. As we know that, as I told you in the beginning, that we have to take a financial approval. So for taking a financial approval, so how much amount we have and how much fund we have utilized, how much fund we have utilized for this particular collection or buying these particular resources. So all the reports we require, sometimes we need to justify the management that this much we have purchased for this particular department, or this much amount is left with us. So in order to calculate all this in a traditional environment, we have to do it in a manual way, so it can commit some kind of a mistake or errors also. When it is in the case of computerization, it is very easy for you to select a particular document, and it is very easy for you to find out how much amount you have spent and how much budget you have left over. All this calculation can be easily taken from this particular module. And based on this particular data, you will be able to make any kind of decision. Suppose there are some strong areas and weak areas where we have spent more amount, where we have spent not even single penny, all this information, all the statistics, all the permutation combinations, etc. can be made using this particular statistical analysis. So this is also very much possible in the acquisition once you make acquisition processor automated. So there are multiple advantages when you automate this particular division as acquisition division, so that you will be able to receive the recommendation online, you will be able to check the duplication online, you will be able to check how many resources are already available in the particular library, and also how the purchase order can be made, how many purchase order we have already made for a particular vendor, how the service of this particular vendor, how many books are in pending, how many books have been already supplied to this supplied by this particular vendor. All these calculations, all the strength and weakness of a particular system can be formulated using the acquisition division if it is computerized. So now we will be going to the next division, that is technical division. So you have to understand what are the procedures which are happening in a technical division also. As we know that technical division is the continuation of acquisition division. So once you have done the acquisition in the manual system, we have done the accessioning process. That means you have given a particular accession number for a resource which have been completely received from a particular vendor. That means the library become owner of this particular product as soon as you give this particular accession number. So the next division is technical division, where in a traditional environment, technical division have the responsibility of taking the books from the acquisition division, and then that particular person will go for classification, cataloging and technical processing. That means how do we do the making of processing like barcode labeling, or making these labels pasted, or the card cataloging. All these things will be done in the technical processing division. That means the technical division is the last division of this particular library, making a particular book making as a serviceable option. So the major works which are happening in a technical division is physical preparation of books, classifications, cataloging, filling of catalog cards, maintaining shelf list, preparation of list of addition and transfer of books. So these are the major works which are done in a particular library as part of technical divisions. Now let us look into the manual procedures which are happening in a technical divisions. As we know that classification is an intellectual process where we use some kind of a materials or the schemes to do the classification. So based on the complexity of the title, it may take time, and sometimes we may be able to get the ready-made numbers. So these are all available in the scenario of classification. So as a classifier, the person who classify a particular book, we call it as classifier, and the person who devises a particular classification scheme, we call it as classificationist. So there are many classification schemes like colon classification, DV decimal classification, universal decimal classification, etc. These are all the popular classification schemes where we can get the classification numbers. So when it is an unautomated or the traditional library, we have to find it out in a manual way. That means we have to see the title of the document, subject of the document, accordingly you have to do the classification. So once classification is done in a manual method, the next stage is cataloging. As we know that we prepare the standard catalog card, and in that we will make all the details like main entries, cross-reference entries, or even the subject entries and cross-reference index entries, etc., etc. So once you made, you will be filing these catalog cards in the alphabetical order. So once it is done, the next stage is the complete processing, like technical processing, like pasting this particular label like due date slip. The last stage of this particular session in a manual system, that we will be pasting the catalog card where we will be issuing, and then we will be making a date slip, stamping and labeling. All these things will be done like secret pages. All these activities will be done in this particular division in a manual system. And finally we will be keeping this particular book which is ready for circulation, we will be keeping in the display for few days, and then it will be going to the rack. So this is the normal procedures which are happening in a technical division. So now let us look into how the computerization can be applied in this particular division. Editing of recording can be done at many times, and also suppose you wanted to do a fast cataloging, you need to enter only the basic details. So that can also possible, but whereas it is not possible in the traditional system. And once it is done, number of times you can change that. And suppose you have uploaded so many books, or you have done the cataloging for many books, and later you found that there are series of books you have committed mistakes. So in a manual system, one by one you need to change. But here there are mechanisms that in a batch mode, or with a single click, or with a single modification, all the modifications will be appeared in the multiple records or multiple items. So with single time you can make many modifications in the entire database where you have done the cataloging and classification. So there are many other advantages, like you will be able to print the spine labels or print the date labels or even print the barcoding, and if you are following barcode and RFID, it is very easy for you to make the details of particular book also. So with this, I hope that you could understand what you mean by these two sessions, major important sections in a particular library: acquisition division and technical division. In both the divisions, you have lot of activities which you do in the manual, but where you apply the computers, you can minimize the number of repetitive works, and this can be utilized for some other constructive work can be provided to the users. Let me conclude with these statements. Housekeeping operations are meant for providing better services to its users, maintaining the library in a systematic way, and performing the duties of staff in an organized form. Housekeeping operations are all the operations which are related to the basic functions of a particular library, such as acquisition, technical, classification, cataloging, even the serial control, maintenance, report, statistics, etc. The process of selecting, ordering and receiving materials for library or archival collections by purchase, exchange or gift, which may include budgeting and negotiating with outside agencies such as publishers, dealers and vendors to obtain resources to meet the needs of the institutions cliently in the most economical and expeditious manner, are part of acquisition division. Technical division is responsible for the transformation of what you have done in the acquisition to the circulation division. That means this is the final unit in which a particular resource is ready for circulation. That means only when the acquisition and technical process is completed, a user is eligible or user is authorized to take a particular book from the library. Dear learners, hope that you have learned much about acquisition division and technical division, how the computers can be applied in the regular functions or giving activities or perform the activities in a acquisition and technical division in a better manner. So all the repetitive works, labor intensive works which can be minimized or which can be done without any errors using a computer or automation software. Thank you.